When debts denominated in currencies are very high, real interest rates for holding these debt assets like bonds are low. So in this case, another large amount of new debts are created by central banks to solve this problem. So how do they do this? They print a lot of money to buy those bonds to prevent real interest rates from falling. And this is what is called as monetization. There is a real economy and a financial economy that are intertwined but very distinct. The real economy and financial economy each have their own supply and demand dynamics. So in this video, we will examine the supply and demand dynamics of the financial economy in order to determine what determines the value of money. Printing money and devaluing money has been the most simplest way out of debt crisis. Currency depreciation has been a topic to talk of these days because even reserve currencies, which is the dollar, euro, and yen, are nearing to their long-term debt cycles. Currency is not a safe asset to keep a store of wealth in it. This is because they either devalue or die for the test of time. When countries produce money in bonds, these are promises for people to receive money later. So in doing that, it helps national debts to be wiped off. And because the debt is also a fixed amount of money to be paid, it's also been devalued and thereby wiped off after some time. This is the smartest way to reduce or eliminate debt burdens. There are two ways in which policymakers use to bring debt service levels down. They either reduce debt service levels relative to the income and cash flow levels, as I just explained, or they either undertake an activity called austerity, which our country Ghana uses. Austerity simply means a difficult economic condition created by government, as we are seeing, to reduce public expenditure. This is why times like these have become a bit very hard. It involves spending less, which affects general public market, and transfer of money and credit from those who have more than they need to those who have less than they need, which it is done indirectly. For this reason, there is an introduction of a digitized system to make it easier to undertake such an activity. There are three primary types of austerity measures, and these are raise taxes to fund spending, 2. Raising taxes while cutting spending, and the last, lower taxes and lower government expenditure. So each of these three types have their pros and cons to the economy. The government of Ghana has made an attempt to introduce a new form of tax called e-levy, which would be the greatest form of revenue to balance its expenditure. Austerity measures are often used by governments that find it difficult to borrow or meet their existing obligations to pay back loans. In 2021, the revenue of governments have just increased by 2%, whilst its expenditure has increased as much as 0.9%. So it has left a huge gap of 14.9% revenue, which has fell since 2019 to 2021. Whilst expenditure has increased on the other hand. So as you can see, it will require government to put down tougher measures for the economy to come down to its sound footing. The government has tried all means as possible to increase its revenue to balance its expenditure without making up the difference by borrowing. Despite having had significant amount of debt being cancelled for the past decade, the country is still losing as much as 30% of its revenue to external debt payment every year. Austerity is deflationary, and because it is so painful, it does not last long. Debt default and restructuring are also deflationary and painful because the debt that are wiped out are worth less now, or someone else's assets now worth less. So default and restructuring are very painful for both sides. The debtor who goes bankrupt and loses their assets, and the creditor who loses wealth as a result of having write down the debt. Debt restructuring is not a new phenomenon. It has been around for a long time, even in the olden days. In the Old Testament, at Deuteronomy, it was done during the year of Jubilee, which is the 50th year after the 49th year of every 100 years. History tells us that slaves were emancipated at that time, and even debt burdens were forgiven, and a new resolution started all over. This is what is termed as the long-term debt restructuring in modern times in economics, which happens every 50 to 70 years. But because it's recognized once in our lifetime or never, people barely recognize it. Most people are more concerned about whether their assets are increasing or decreasing in value. But however, we pay less concern about whether our currency is increasing or decreasing in value, which is the currency risk. Debt restructuring, which is accomplished by printing money, as I earlier described, has a greatest benefit because it causes asset prices to rise in the depreciating currency that people use to measure their wealth. So it gives an impression we are getting richer since our calculated wealth has risen. The most important thing for currency to devalue against is its own debt. This is because the goal of printing money is to reduce debt burden. And because debt is a promise to deliver money, giving more money to those who need it reduces debt burdens. When central banks increase the supply of money and credit, which is bad for the money and credit holders, but very good for the debtors. When debt relief allows money and credit to flow into companies, productivity, profit, and even stock prices rise. But it can also cause harm to prospective returns to cash and debt assets. This can drive people away from the assets into inflationary hedge assets and other currencies, which will slow down the economy.